Conducting sleep research. Some more about sleep research. How do we study sleep? Look at that poor kid. And they just look like, thanks, Mom. Love you. Conducting sleep research. We put people in sleep labs. Anybody ever been to a sleep lab before? What they do in the sleep lab, they measure your body functions, such as how relaxed or tense your muscles are, your eye movements, your heart rate, your breathing. And we can also measure your brain activity. How much activity is going on across the cortex of your brain? When we're looking at sleep, how do we measure brain activity? What's that device called? EEG, anybody know what it stands for? Electroencephalograph. Electroencephalograph. Electroencephalograph is an EEG. EEG is electroencephalograph. Nudge, nudge. Thanks for coming to class. We can also measure the overall pattern of electrical activity. We'll break this down just a little bit for you. We don't get too technical, just technical. If we look at brainwave, this is how we measure them in their variance of height and number in time frame. So two different ways to measure them, height and number in time frame. You might want to underline those two. Height and number in time frame is how we measure brainwaves. We measure brainwaves through height and number in time frame. Did you get that part? If you have your book, grab your book. You have this chart 198. Your book has some of this information. It doesn't have all of it, so we're going to complete it so that you have it all. It's not wrong. It just doesn't give you all the extras that you might want. So your book actually starts right here. It starts at the relaxed state. It doesn't actually do your awake stage. The awake stage, I don't know why they don't put it in there. They call it, what do they call it? Awake relaxed. Here we call it relaxed. So there's a step before it. This is when you're awake, right now, hopefully. When you are awake and you are active, you have beta waves. If you want to jot that in there. So this is when you're going through your day. You're thinking, you're working, beta waves. So here your book starts. It actually labels this one as the alpha waves. Stage 1 are theta. Stage 2 is theta and sleep spindles. And 3 and 4 we chunk together. We like to nickname 3 and 4 slow wave sleep. Slow wave sleep. And in that we have delta. And when we hit REM, I found 2 different waves that people like to refer to. So we're going to go with what your book has just to keep it simple for you since you've already put that into your brain. Your REM sleep is going to be similar to your alpha waves. They're similar to your alpha, similar to your beta, but just to keep it simple, we're going to call it similar to alpha. The stages 3 and 4 are nicknamed what? Slow wave. And stage 2 has theta and spindles. Okay, spindles are, if you take a look, these waves are just kind of hanging out, and then all of a sudden, you get this random burst of activity. That's what a sleep spindle is. So if you notice, they're pretty similar to stage 1, these theta waves. Theta waves, theta waves, theta waves. Boom, you have this random burst of activity, and then you go back to your theta waves. So how do we measure brain waves again? So we're going to pretend that that right there marks the second. So here's the second worth of time. If we look at height first, notice the difference in height? That one's pretty simple. Okay, number within a time frame. When we look at number within a time frame, we're going to count how many of these peaks happen within a certain time period. So we're going to use a second. How many peaks do we have here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8-ish. How about on this one? How many peaks do we have? 3. So is there a pretty dramatic difference between the two of those? Absolutely. So we take a look at the height. We take a look at how many happen within a certain time period. That's how we describe them. That's how we measure them. So if you look at actual ones instead of my Jessica drawing, this is what they actually look like. So if we compare height here versus height here, pretty dramatic difference. The same as number within time frame. Here's their actual second versus a second versus a second. Pretty amazing. So we're going to look at some differences. How do brain waves change across time? As we go through our sleep cycles, gradually they get higher, and there's a fewer number within our time frame. A few other things that happen. We start breathing slower, heart rate decreases, our muscles relax, and our body temperature drops. So we're going to take a look at REM sleep. REM stands for what? Rapid eye movement. Literally, your eyes move from side to side during REM sleep. Have you ever noticed this on somebody? Yeah? Dogs. A lot of times you see it on dogs. Dogs do it too. Babies do it too. Yeah. You have to take a look at somebody next time you see someone sleeping. Don't let them wake up and freak them out. We call REM sleep paradoxical sleep. What is a paradox? Something that contradicts. So you have something that kind of goes against itself. So there's two sides to REM. The first side is we see that it's deep sleep. It's hard to wake somebody when they're in REM. They have irregular breathing and heart rate, something called atonia, which we'll talk about. Atonia happens when you are waking up from sleep. You can hear, you can smell, you can see, but you cannot get your muscles to move. So imagine this for a moment. Here you are, you're asleep, you wake up, you're like, oh, I smell bacon. I'm going to go eat breakfast. And you can't move. Kind of odd, huh? So there's a difference between being so tired and actually hitting this phase of you're awake, you're conscious, but you can't get yourself to move. So kind of curious. So that's the deep side of this paradox. The opposite side, our brain waves are like alpha waves during REM. We discovered that. And alpha waves happen when you're still awake. Huh. So how is this a contradiction? Well, part of you is definitely in deep sleep, your physical portion, but you have the activity, your brain waves are very similar to when you're awake. Isn't that crazy? So physiologically, your body is about as dead as it can get, so to speak, and your brain is active. See the contradiction? Paradoxical sleep is the nickname for it. If we take a look at dreaming, we'll dig deeper into dreaming, but we're just going to touch on it for a second. This is cool. This is a study I would never want to do. We put people in a sleep lab. We hook them up to the EEG so we can record their brain waves. When they hit REM, we wake them up. And we say, hey, are you dreaming? 80% of the people who are awakened during REM said, yes, I was. Can we go back to sleep now? So here we go, the cycle of sleep. Ooh, we made it. So this is cool. What is it? Very good. The cycle of sleep. What do you see in our cycle of sleep? Our posture shifts, our eye movements. What do you notice about eye movements? They go crazy during REM. Here's REM, here's REM, there's REM. Your eyes go crazy. They have that back and forth movement during REM. What else do you notice? REM period extends the longer you sleep. So here we have our first REM. We're pretty small. It's about twice as long there. Gets longer there. A little bit longer there. So the longer you sleep, the longer your REM gets. Wow. Your dreams bubble up during REM. Look at that. There's a lot here, a lot there. You might have some reports in between. But for the most part, during REM, wow, your brain's having fun. It doesn't go to stage 4 towards the end. So we go 1, 2, 3, 4. And then we go straight up to REM, or what happens? Go back up. So we do stage 1, followed by, this seems very obvious, but work with me for a second. Stage 2, followed by, followed by, and then REM. So a lot of times we like to say it goes 1, 2, 3, 4 REM. Not the case. 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2 REM. Does that make sense? This is considered a cycle. 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2 REM. Approximately 90 minutes. In our perfect world, we're going to talk about how perfect this cycle is, or lack thereof. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 3, 2 REM takes approximately 90 minutes for one cycle. So repeat the cycle 4 times. As we mentioned, the REM gets longer as the night progresses. And also you picked out, we have fewer entrances into slow wave sleep. What is slow wave sleep? There we go. 3 and 4 is slow wave sleep. So as the night progresses, we actually just dip down into 2, a little bit into 3, and then here we don't even hit stage 3. Do we all sleep this beautifully and perfectly? No. Anybody ever have to get up and go to the bathroom? Does that affect it? Anybody have a spouse that snores? Dogs that yap? Neighbors that are loud? So sleep patterns vary considerably. Neural involvement in sleep. This we're just going to touch on very basically because we're going to talk about the brain later on. So here's a beautiful picture of the brain if you haven't ever seen a picture of a brain before. Specifically, we're going to talk about the brainstem. The brainstem allows us to go into sleep and then to come back up out of sleep. So if we're talking about arousal in the sense of waking up, if we stimulate the brainstem, it causes us to be alert. And if we stop the stimulation, if we cut off the stimulation, it causes us to sleep. The lesion meaning stopping the stimulation. Very briefly, neurotransmitters. Neurotransmitters we'll talk about more in depth when we talk about brain and biology as well. Neurotransmitters help our body to communicate. Specifically, serotonin is going to help us with this. So what type of food items supposedly help you to sleep better? Turkey is one. Warm milk is another. And there's a third one. This one I hadn't heard of. Liquor, we'll talk about liquor. Does liquor actually help you sleep or does it hinder your sleep? The three that we have is milk, cheese, and turkey. Have y'all heard of cheese before? I haven't either. It really helps us to produce serotonin. So what happens if we don't get sleep? Sleep deprivation. First, we're going to talk about complete deprivation, meaning you don't get to sleep at all. We completely deprive you of all types of sleep. We're going to talk about Randy Gardner. He was 17 years old, went 11 days without sleeping. He was not on drugs. Mr. Gardner reports minor hallucinations and some speech problems. We also found some, they call them modest negative effects. He was a little sleepy, had a hard time concentrating, and believe it or not, he was a little grumpy. Not surprising because it doesn't take me 11 days to get grumpy. There's this really cool thing called microsleep period. Basically what happens, he's hooked up to an EEG so that we can look at his brainwaves. And even though functionally he is still awake, his eyes are open, he can still talk, he can still interact, he can still move. His body is physically awake, but his brain actually falls into stage 1 sleep. Isn't that fascinating? So even though he is totally awake, according to our awake standards, his brain activity falls into technically a sleep period, microsleep period. So that's complete deprivation, 11 days straight, no sleep. What if it's something not as severe? We look at partial deprivation. So partial deprivation, you get less sleep, but it's not 11 days consistent. What they find is that there's increased sleepiness, but we can make it up pretty easily. So if you go a night without sleeping because you're writing a paper, the next night you go to sleep, you'll be able to sleep okay. You'll be able to make up for it. Because here's the cool thing. If you miss out on one night's sleep, so you miss out on 8 hours of sleep, the next day, do you have to sleep an extra 8 hours to make up for it? So even though you miss out on 8 hours, the next night you don't have to sleep for an additional 8 hours. You might want to tack on an extra hour or two, maybe 3, take a nap. But it's not a 1-to-1 ratio. If you miss 8, you don't have to make up for 8. Your body makes up for it on its own. If we take a look at REM deprivation, again, we hook somebody up to an EEG. They hit REM, we wake them up. We let them go back to sleep. They go through their cycles, they hit REM, we wake them up. They go back to sleep. So every time they hit REM, we wake them up so that they can't have their REM. What happens if we deprive people of REM, find that there's not a huge effect on daily functions, and another really cool thing called REM rebounds. Okay, so let's say Saturday night, you miss out on your REM for whatever reason. I'll give you some examples later. But if you miss out on REM on a Saturday night, the next time you go to sleep on Sunday night, you are going to hit your REM faster and you will stay in REM longer to help make up for the REM that you missed out on. So Sunday night, you're going to have some great dreams. Do you remember some different things that affect REM based upon your book? Alcohol. Is alcohol a good thing to drink before you go to bed? Why? Isn't it good to have a shot of whiskey before bed? Is that what Grandpa says? What does alcohol do to your sleep? You don't sleep as well because it affects what stage? REM. It affects your REM. So when you drink alcohol, you consume alcohol, it actually doesn't allow you to get that great quality REM sleep that your body loves. So that's why if you go out drinking on Saturday nights, you kind of do this tossing and turning, you don't get that great restful sleep. So when Sunday rolls around and you go to sleep on Sunday, you go to sleep and you have great dreams because you hit this REM rebound. Sleeping pills. Your book talks about sleeping pills. Unfortunately, it focuses more on the addiction portion of it, which is fine. But more importantly, what happens with sleeping pills and REM? When you take sleeping pills, the same thing happens. Even though it lets you get into sleep, it doesn't let you get that great quality REM sleep. So just like alcohol, that REM sleep is not obtained. So REM rebound. So alcohol affects your sleep by not allowing you to hit your REM as well as your sleeping pills. So if you ever see that question again in the future, yeah, there's that whole tolerance issue thing. But more importantly, how does it affect your REM cycle? That's what you want to hit on. Hint, hint, nudge, nudge. So here's the overlying question. Why do we sleep?